Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 15th, 2023. Today I'm going to take up the question of censorship and the censorship-industrial complex, which is designed to make you ignorant and depressed and to control the narrative so that you have no idea of what's actually happening and no sense of what you can do to change it. What we're seeing is after 20 months now of a war, proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, we're finally beginning to see cracks appear in the media. An acknowledgement that the Zelensky regime is corrupt, that the counteroffensive that was so hyped by the media is a failure, that the negotiations were sabotaged by NATO, that there could have been a settlement at the beginning of the war. They still haven't given the whole picture, the whole backstory of the U.S. support for the Ukraine coup in February 2014, Biden's role in it, and so on. Much of that is still kept out of the media. But we're beginning to see, if you have a memory, that the mainstream media has been lying to you since the beginning of the special military operation in February 2022. Now, we're also seeing the same thing now about the situation in Gaza. There are a lot of things that are not being made clear, like how was there an intelligence failure that allowed Hamas forces to infiltrate Israeli territory despite the technological capability and the military ring around Gaza? How did they get through that? We're also not being told the truth about what's being done to the people of Palestine and for how long. And that this didn't start on October 7th, but this crisis goes back 70-something years to the beginning of the state of Israel, which was used by the British as a geopolitical manipulation for the control of the area of Southwest Asia. Well, one thing you may have heard, maybe not, but that there were over 1,000 signatures of State Department and U.S. Agency for International Development officials accusing Biden of supporting genocide with his policy of protection of Netanyahu in this invasion. They're calling for a ceasefire, for humanitarian aid, and they cite a poll that says that 66% of the American people want a ceasefire. Now, meanwhile, the battle rages on. There's fighting between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. There are charges and countercharges about whether the hospital that's being besieged is a cover for a tunnel network used by the Hamas fighters and so on. But what we're now seeing is an attempt to move into a new realm of an occupation. Now, what's interesting is that Ynet, the Israeli news service, is now reporting that Netanyahu is trying to bring in Tony Blair to handle humanitarian relief. How do you bring in a war criminal like Tony Blair, who is responsible for the deaths of perhaps 1 million Iraqis, as well as service members from the United States and NATO, in a war that was fought over lies that were promoted and probably concocted by Tony Blair and his networks in British intelligence? Now, the attempt to get at the truth here came out in a report that was issued by the Judiciary Committee of the Congress titled "The Weaponization of Disinformation, Pseudo-Experts and Bureaucrats: How the Federal Government Partnered with Universities to Censor Americans' Political Speech." And it's a review of the whole disinformation industrial complex, how the Department of Homeland Security set up front groups such as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, called CISA, C-I-S-A, which put pressure on Silicon Valley to shadow ban or ban fully accounts that challenge the official narrative of the deep state. Now, maybe that's why it's sometimes hard to find my videos, that CISA doesn't like the truth to get out. But they talk about cyber and hybrid warfare, the control of so-called information. They highlight the Stanford University Internet Observatory role and something called the Election Integrity Projects. They also report charges that CISA is used as a cover for censorship overall to bypass First Amendment protections of free speech. They report that non-compliance with CISA directives may lead to legal action against companies. In other words, the federal government policing free speech, which is a violation of the Constitution. And among the think tanks identified as involved in this disinformation project is the Atlantic Council, which we've reported on repeatedly as a leading Anglo-American think tank funded by the British government, the US government, and many corporations that is a major purveyor of the Anglo-American narrative, promoting lies and disinformation around the Ukraine war and now the Gaza war. Now, the cyber warfare overall has conducted an ongoing operation for many, many years, but let's just focus on since 2016. You had the combination of GCHQ, the British National Security Agency, with the State Department, CIA, and the major media to slander Trump and Putin with the so-called Russiagate story, which has now been thoroughly discredited, even though some newscasters still bring it up. And they're bringing it up as we get closer to the 2024 election. These cyber projects promote the ideas of British geopolitics that essentially try to justify wars on behalf of maintaining an order, a so-called unipolar order, by targeting Russia, China, and the global South generally. We've seen this in the coverage of the proxy war in Ukraine and now the ongoing policy of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. None of the media report on the backstory. They treat these as events that started, in the case of Ukraine, in February 2022 or Gaza October 7th of this year, and leave out the back history, which is necessary to understand what's actually going on. And if you're going to get out of this bubble, out of this crisis, you need to know what's involved in it. But they don't want you to know that. They also are now preparing for a war against China. And to prevent you from knowing about the anti-colonial revolt going on in the global South, with African countries, Asian countries, Latin American countries turning toward Russia and China, and against the weaponization of the dollar, which has kept them poor and underdeveloped. And we're now seeing an emergence of a new potential development architecture, which will do what the colonial system was designed to prevent, which is allow sovereign nations of the global South to emerge as fully industrialized nations capable of protecting the interests of their population. But they don't want you to know that. Now, I know that most of our viewers are tired of being lied to, of having the information that you get laundered through the agencies that are in fact benefiting from these policies. That you know that there's a corrupt media cartel. You know that it works for the corrupt corporate cartels of the military-industrial complex, run by neocons and neoliberals who are trying to preserve the so-called rules-based order. However, many of you have been intimidated by this, afraid to speak out, afraid to be heard having the, quote, wrong opinion, unquote, being ostracized or attacked for your views. Or worse, you're convinced there's no way to change things. For example, even the State Department and AID officials who signed this letter protesting Biden's policy on the Middle East, they insisted on anonymity. That is, most of them would not allow their names to be published. Why? Because their fear of being fired, their fear of being put on the wrong side of the narrative. So if you go back to this question of how to defeat the mainstream media, start with the idea of sharing our videos, getting them out to people. Make sure that people see what we're saying about this. Later today, I'm going to have my weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. We'll be discussing these ideas, Hopefully, they'll get up on YouTube, Facebook, and all over social media so that you can hear what she has to say. And also consider signing up for the Executive Intelligence Review's daily news report, which is where I get a lot of what I report to you every day. I'll have a link to that in the description section. Most importantly, don't allow the war hawks, the neoliberal, corrupt, greedy bastards to control what comes into your house and into your mind. We have to fight for the sovereign creative capability of human beings, and that means fighting for the truth. And that's what I try to do every day. That's what the LaRouche organization has been doing for the last more than 50 years. And we've done it in spite of the attacks on us, which included the jailing, the illegal jailing of Lyndon LaRouche, the founder of our organization. So we're not going to quit. And I encourage those of you who appreciate what we have to say to not quit either, to join us in this fight. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again tomorrow.